Welcome to the latest Wax Ecstatic Pack Break. I'm your host, Matt Salmon, and just look at these beauties. Shiny. Yes, we continue our look at some of the gems from the early 1990s from Donruss. About a month ago, we looked back at 1992 Donruss, which was not only just a huge improvement over what the company put out in 1990 and 1991, but it was also part of the trend of the hobby at the time, where base sets were looking more like premium sets, featuring a lot of glossy cards, a lot of inserts, and it was a much needed turn of events for Donruss. They had to produce a set as solid as they did in 1992, or they'd be kicked by the wayside. Now, unfortunately for Donruss, the turning of the corner came a little too late, as competition such as Bowman, but also some of those premium sets like Top Stadium Club, Fleer Ultra, and of course Upper Deck, they were just a little too far ahead of Donruss to really make a big impact. But here we are almost 30 years later looking back at some of the creations, and Donruss produced great sets at that time, and even though they were produced in smaller numbers than what was made in the late 80s during the heat of the junk wax era, even in 1993 there were still a lot of cards being produced, which means there's still a lot out there now, and you can get them at relatively reasonable prices these days. So let's open up these Series 1 packs of 1993 Donruss. We'll be talking about this set on our upcoming podcast this Friday, January the 15th. So as you can see, you've got the tamper-resistant packaging. Let's see, new for 1993, the Spirit of the Game, randomly inserted Spirit of the Game cards. They capture the emotion and the action of the American pastime. Each card features two fronts of borderless design and gold foil stamping. So you can already see Insert Mania. That was big in 1993 and would ultimately be a big reason why a lot of people got out of the hobby around that time. Now, as the wrapper mentions, Series 2 featured some of those cards. Donruss was split into two series once again. And we'll look at card number 1 here, Mr. Mariano Duncan. Great action shot here of him. Looks like he's popping out. Not Rudy Meoli style, but still popping out. And let's take a look at the back of the card real quick. While the backs of the 1992 Donruss cards were chock full of information and much better than what Donruss had been putting out for the previous 7 or 8 years, it was still kind of busy. There was just a lot going on. You can see, though, on the back of the cards for 1993 Donruss, much cleaner and almost a ripoff of what Upper Deck had been doing at that time. You see the full color action photo on the back here takes up about 2/3 of the top of the card. You've got the card number here in the base. It says Series 1, player name and a small blue bar up top. Recent Major League statistics, yes, one of the stats or one of the layouts of stats that I despised with Donruss, and then just a little bit of personal information down here. But again, just on the surface, and this is just card number 1 here, you've got the glossiness. Let me get in the light there. You can see the high gloss, not quite UV coating, so these things don't stick to one another like Stadium Club or Fleer Ultra cards do. But great action shots on the front, team logo down here, player name there, modernized Donruss logo in the corner, and then a very active, colorful, but easy to read back of the card. So a huge step up on the backs of the cards from 1992, but also keeping a pretty classy presentation on the front. Now, I'll talk about the logos in just a moment. Let's see what else is in this pack. We've got pitcher Mike Perez of the St. Louis Cardinals, Thomas Howard of the Cleveland Indians, Kurt Stillwell, most people remember him from his days in Kansas City, but here with San Diego, Mike Henneman of the Detroit Tigers, one of the really underrated relief pitchers of the time. We got El Presidente, Danny Martinez with the Montreal Expos. Flip this card over. We've got a few cards we got to flip over here. Travis Fryman, really at, dare I say, the peak of his career. He had quite a few good seasons back then. Pat Borders, then the defending World Series MVP. What's funny is in 1993, see, how old was Pat Borders? He was 30 years old. He turned 30 in May of 1993. Pat Borders, of course, would go on to play for, I think, 10 more years. I mean, who knew in 1993 that the defending World Series MVP still had a long way to go in his career. Here's Greg Vaughn with the Milwaukee Brewers, again in the thick of his prime. Kirk McCaskill, former hockey goalie with the Chicago White Sox. Got Hal Morris fielding that bouncing ball at first base. Jimmy Poole of the Baltimore Orioles. And Doug Jones showing off that rainbow uni of the Houston Astros. And again, a great look at the back of the card here. All right, so who would be the biggest star in that? Travis Fryman, maybe? Denny Martinez? Maybe Greg Vaughn? All right, not exactly loaded with stars. Let's see what pack number 2 brings us. Perhaps a Diamond Kings insert. That was the second year where Diamond Kings became the insert card. Now, I'm not liking how this is looking. We got Kirk McCaskill again on the back here. So it tells me we got a little bit of duplication, but let's see what we've got. We've got Doug Strange with a nice ad for the Superstation TBS here, clearly playing in Atlanta. And, of course, anytime you see a Chicago Cub from there, you think of the Superstation WGN, and it's Doug Strange over at third base. Wow, what a nice play. Louis Soho of the California Angels. Now, what's interesting here is this was the new Angel logo at that time, and it was a little bit of a throwback. It's so funny how 90s nostalgia today. A lot of teams are throwing back to logos from the 80s and 90s. Well, in 1993, the Angels threw back their logo. Essentially, it was somewhat modernized, but essentially to the logo that the Angels wore from 1965 to 1970. And again, pre-internet, it's so hard to tell people or remind people what life was like before the internet. But this was how you knew of things like this. Because here's Louis Soho. He's wearing the old Angel uniform. In fact, if we look at the back of the card here, it is an even better shot here. The old Angel uniform, something that had been, with just some minor alterations, relatively untouched since the mid-70s. But this was a sign of things were changing in Anaheim. All right, we've got Jeff Branson of the Cincinnati Reds, not to be confused with Branson, Missouri, of course. Alex Fernandez with the White Sox. Donovan Osborne in the windup here with the Cardinals. Let's see, flip these cards over here. We've got Dan Wilson, catcher extraordinaire for the Cincinnati Reds there. There we go. That's what I'm talking about, the Hall of Famer. Look at that. Tony Gwynn having a whale of a time, getting ready to go up to bat. Chris Nabbles of the Montreal Expos. Vinny Castilla. I think we may be talking a little bit about Vinny Castilla in this upcoming podcast. Because in 1993, this was a big card to have. This would have been a rookie card for Vinny Castilla. And he was definitely a huge prospect with the Atlanta Braves, would later go on to Colorado, and then to the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, where those of us living here at the time referred to him rather mockingly as Vinny Cash Stealer. He was not quite up to snuff. Norm Charlton, dominant left-handed reliever of the time. Look at that action shot. That's a great shot, other than the fact it's a little dark in the background here. But Sean Hare, eye on the ball. And I'm going to guess that he struck out here, or certainly didn't swing, because that ball is about 8 inches from the plate. But what a great action shot. Let me bring it up a little closer here. I mean, look at that. Watching that ball come in there. It's coming in a little high, dipping a little bit too. It's a curveball or a slider about to drop out. But great action shot. And on the back, at least he's swinging for the fences there. Good old Spanky, Mike LaValle. Battery mate Danny Nagel. And our only duplicates, that's a good sign. Kirk McCaskill finishing up. Now, I want to show you this too real quickly. Remember we were talking in our last podcast about throwback sets, the 1991 Topps archive set, which looked back at the 1953 Topps set. And that was all a big part of just this groundswell of nostalgia that was happening in the early 90s. People wanted to see more of baseball from the 50s and 60s. Well, this Pirates uniform, now I don't have my UniWatch blog open. I don't have my book of 20th century baseball uniforms right next to me, but I do know that this throwback uniform that Denny Nagel's wearing, this harkens back to the late 30s, I believe, for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So again, just underlying the point of how people were just clamoring for throwback stuff then, much like they are nowadays. So if you're clamoring for an affordable throwback set that's got Hall of Famers, that has throwback pictures from the early 90s, that also has pretty honorable players, and it also has players who completely bombed out with the Tampa Bay Devil Rays hit show attempt in the year 2000. May I recommend 93 Donruss? Now, we just went through Series 1. We'll talk about Series 1 and Series 2 in this upcoming podcast. And we hope that you can join us. Again, Friday, January 15th, the podcast drops at noon Eastern on our home base at Audio Boom and goes all around the world via the RSS feed to Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Stitcher, Blueberry, Google Play, Spotify, you name it. We're there. It's the next Wax Ecstatic coming your way this Friday, January 15th. I'm your host, Matt Salmon. Thanks for joining us on this pack break of 1993 Donruss Series 1 from Wax Ecstatic.